Our top focus, Iran. The protests are continuing to spread in the country and have now entered their 15th day. This is despite a deadly crackdown and the threat of facing the death penalty for the protesters. Iran's internet blackout is past the 70-hour mark, but visuals continue to trickle in, reportedly thanks to smuggled Starlink devices which exist in Iran. That's how they're able to record videos and send them out. 2 weeks of demonstrations, over 2 weeks now. They have posed one of the biggest challenges to the authorities in Iran, who have ruled since 1979, after the Islamic Revolution. Fresh videos coming out of Tehran and other cities are likely using Starlink satellite transmitters. These show how the protests have spread far and wide. In his first remarks, after 3 nights of intensified anti-regime protests in Iran, President Masoud Pezeshkian says rioters should not be allowed to disrupt Iranian society.
We ask that in every neighborhood, people come together and not let these people riot. If people have a concern, we will hear them. It is our duty to hear them and solve their problems. However, our highest duty is to not allow rioters to come and disrupt the society.
Iran's police chief says security forces have stepped up efforts to confront rioters on the streets. And this as authorities attempt to quell the unrest that has spread across Iran since the 28th of December.
As for the police, given that we consider this level as the level of riots, we'll have a firm, fast, and sharp response to the rioters. And protesters should also know that they are being used as bait, which may result in death.
In Mashhad, the hometown of Iran's supreme leader, protesters gathered along a highway chanting slogans as fires burned around them. The protesters were heard chanting "Pahlavi will return" and "Long live the king." The protests began in response to soaring inflation before turning against the country's clerical establishment. The government accuses the US and Israel of fomenting unrest. And this is another video that you see on your screens. It's shared on social media and it showed crowds gathered in Punak Square in Tehran. The internet blackout continues in Iran and phone lines have been cut off. According to the US-based human rights activists news agency, the death toll in the protests has surpassed the 200 mark and over 2,600 people have been detained. Demonstrations are taking place in different parts of the world as protesters, in solidarity with the protesters in Iran. For example, in London, a protester briefly replaced the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran on its London embassy with a former flag which was used in Iran during the time of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, when Iran was still under a monarchy before 1979. That flag stayed in place for a few minutes before being removed on the embassy. That's a view of the flag. Now, the US President Trump, he said on Saturday his country was ready to help the movement. Trump wrote on social media, Iran is looking at freedom, perhaps like never before, and the US stands ready to help. And this message invited a sharp response from the Iranian government. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, warned that any US attack would lead to Tehran striking back. Israel and regional US military bases would be considered legitimate targets.
Know that in case of an attack on Iran, the occupied lands as well as US military bases in the region will be our legitimate targets. And with all these clear confessions that you made about invading Iran, we will not limit ourselves to a reaction. We will act based on signs of threats.
All right, to discuss this further, I'm now being joined by Giorgio Cafiero, Professor, Georgetown University and CEO, Gulf State Analytics, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Professor Cafiero, thanks so much for making time for us. I want to first address these calls for Pahlavi to return. Long live the king, Pahlavi will return. These are chants which are being heard from these protesters or rioters, whichever way one would want to describe them. I want to understand from you, what do you make of these chants? They're calling for somebody to come back to Iran, who's never ruled Iran, whose father was deposed for his ways. And there are enough stories of the Shah, his father, Pahlavi's father, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whose meals used to come from different parts of the world, and the economy was in shambles back in 1979. Perhaps these same people who are protesting on the streets right now, their grandparents were protesting in 1979 against the Shah. And now they're asking for the Shah to return. What's happening in your understanding?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me back on your program. Always good to be with you. You know, he is a figure with a very high profile. He's had a high profile for a long time. And obviously, I think it's important to appreciate the fact that the Iranian public inside Iran is very divided, and there are also deep divisions within the Iranian diaspora here in the United States and around the world, and among segments of Iranians, both at home in Iran and across the world. There is a nostalgia for the era of his father, and I think it speaks to the extent to which there's so much dissatisfaction with the current leadership in Iran, the leadership that's been there since 1979, that has contributed to this nostalgia on the part of segments of Iranian society at home and abroad. That being said, while we can see some scenes in Mashhad and other parts of the country with Iranians chanting his name and calling for him to return, or calling for him to come to Iran and be the leader of a post-Islamic Republic, Iran, I'm not so sure that we can conclude that he has the support of the majority of Iranians. I think there are many Iranians who do not support the Islamic Republic and want political change, but would think that putting this man who has never really had a job and never had a political leadership role in his life in power just because of his last name, just because of a brand, is a way forward. I think many people in Iran who want to see democratic change would not be in favor of having this individual become the country's next leader.
Understood. Professor, when it comes to what's happening on the ground in Iran, the death toll, it has crossed 200, but again, there's an internet blackout, so the real figures are perhaps yet to surface. What we know so far is this: nearly 203 people have died in these protests, which includes security officials and civilians. Nearly 70 hours of internet blackout, violence across Iran. How close are we to seeing a military confrontation between Iran and the US and Israel on the other side?
Well, it's really difficult to know. Obviously, Trump has put out these statements threatening Iran, saying that if the authorities are going to kill protesters, the U.S. will possibly take military action against Iran. We have seen protesters being killed, and as of now, the U.S. has not yet taken such military action. My understanding, based on the available reports, is that Trump is considering different options right now, not all of them necessarily including military force. He really has yet to make a final decision. I do think it is important to keep in mind, though, that there is a large segment of Trump's MAGA base here in the United States that is not in favor of the United States getting sucked into protracted conflicts around the world, especially in the Middle East. And we do have to consider the fact that Iran does have the ability to retaliate against U.S. troops and U.S. interests in the region. Under that scenario, Trump could find himself being pulled into a conflict that involves Iran. I think Trump's impulse is to avoid moving in that direction. But at the same time, there are figures in his administration who are very much, these are neoconservative hawks who very much want to see Trump take military action against Iran. Time will tell how Trump ultimately handles this.
Yeah, Professor, while we were speaking, and as I mentioned earlier, perhaps the real figure of the death toll is yet to come out because there is an internet blackout. What we've just learned is the death toll has crossed 460 in these protests, and these figures are rapidly coming in. So it could perhaps be even more as and when the details are able to make it past Iran. That means the protests have not only just been deadly, they are rapidly expanding, and the death toll, the actual one, as of now, is only increasing. Where do you see this one spiraling into?
Well, I think what's clear is that the regime in Iran is going to try to deal with the situation by clamping down on the protesters. And it's also, unfortunately, difficult to imagine the government being in a position to address the underlying causes of these protests and the grievances on the part of average Iranians who are struggling to survive amid these very, very difficult economic conditions that have become very dire, not only because of the government's corruption and mismanagement, but also because of the impact of U.S. sanctions. To get to the point, I don't think the government has too many options right now. I don't think the government has much room for maneuverability. I also do not see the protests coming to an end anytime soon. Maybe there will be a clampdown that can shut things down for a while, but it will only be a matter of time until they restart. This is a legitimacy crisis that Iran's government is facing, and I don't see that coming to an end anytime soon. That being said, none of this is to say that the collapse of the regime is inevitable or imminent.
All right, Professor Kafiro, thanks so much for joining us here on the broadcast. Once again, just to repeat for our viewers, the death toll in Iran, as figures are gradually coming out, it has crossed 460. It's 466 as we speak. And as I'd mentioned, there is an internet blackout. So the figures are gradually coming out, could be even more.